With all the different question marks and variables for the Missouri defense this season, let's consider if Corey Batoon might actually be an upgrade and what that would mean for Missouri. Let's talk about that and more right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and the merchant of mirth here in the Mizzou podcast space. A lot of defense to talk about on today's program, including one of the least favorite wrinkles last year for Blake Baker, Johnny Walker in pass coverage. Looking like that's going to stick around a little bit here, at least with Corey Batoon. So let's talk about that later in the show. First, I want to start by saying today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. The terms apply. And here's the thing. I want to start by talking about the Missouri defense in a lot of detail here today. And I want to make the case, really, that this defense could actually be about as good as last season, at the very least, maybe even slightly improved in some areas. And I'm hesitant to even bring this up as a possibility, of course, because Missouri lost 5 NFL draft picks this past offseason. In particular, your 2 starting cornerbacks, a first-round quality edge rusher in Darius Robinson, of course, Tyron Hopper, Jalen Carlies as well. But here's the thing. A lot of people are also worried that Blake Baker, the Missouri former defensive coordinator, took his talents down to Baton Rouge, Louisiana for the LSU Tigers. Well, here's the thing. If we're going to be worried about Corey Batoon, and it's fair to be at least concerned, have question marks, think of it as a variable at the very least. Well, I'd say that Eli Drinkwitz, first of all, deserves a huge benefit of the doubt on hiring defensive coordinators and especially just assistants in general. Now, let's be real. There is no doubt that Steve Wilks, as a hire as Missouri's defensive coordinator 2-3 seasons ago, that was a whiff by Eli Drinkwitz. Swing and a miss. I'll give him a D- or an F on that hire if you would like. I'm not going to argue with you whatsoever. But if you think about the rest of the hires that Eli Drinkwitz has made in his time at Missouri, including, of course, the aforementioned Blake Baker, I'd say that Eli deserves an A to an A+ on the rest of his hires, quite honestly. And I have to assume that Drinkwitz, who, again, this is year 5 of him as a head coach here at Missouri, still a relatively young guy at 41 years old, he surely has learned from that Steve Wilks experience and every other hiring experience he's had at Missouri so far. He certainly learned from hiring Blake Baker, what worked about Baker that didn't work with Wilks, and maybe a little bit of the other thing as well. Maybe some holes or just room for improvement in Baker's game that hopefully Missouri has found here in Corey Batoon. And by the way, speaking of new guys, well, Zion Young, transfer from Michigan State, edge rusher, probably going to be starting opposite Johnny Walker at edge for the Tigers, it looks like at the moment. He was asked what it's like been working with Coach Batoon and also defensive edge coach Brian Early as well. And Zion Young said he's been tremendous. It's been great. Corey Batoon is a very interesting guy. He's very funny and been very good. Same with Coach Early. You know, good guy, focused on all the details and all that stuff. Big emphasis on pass rushing here, stopping the run, just dominating your box. So obviously a player at this point is probably going to praise Corey Batoon, but it just seems like that's been the overall theme with Batoon so far, is that everybody seems to like him, his personality, and as Christian Williams called him, he's the situational master. Maybe there are times that on 3rd and long, that type of deal where Missouri can get just a little bit better defensively. Now, here's the thing. The case for Batoon actually being an upgrade over Blake Baker this coming season, This isn't meant to be a huge insult to Blake Baker, and I have had some fans say that they think the Missouri defense may have actually underachieved a little bit last season based on those 5 NFL draft picks. Well, quite honestly, you look back at the Missouri schedule in 2023, I'm just not there, and the overall numbers at the end of the season said that was a top 15 national type defense. So for me, I'm not going to say that Blake Baker was bad. I certainly wanted Blake Baker back for this coming season. If I would have had it my way, that's exactly what would have happened. But it didn't happen, and now we have Corey Batoon. But here's the thing. Even though I don't want to insult Blake Baker, I also don't want to overstate his importance either, because as I've said before, as much as I think Baker did an excellent job at Missouri, I also don't think he's God's gift to defense in terms of scheme and X's and O's or anything like that. Missouri, for the most part, previous 2 seasons, played a lot of aggressive, single high safety, man-to-man type defense. And they would blitz quite a bit. When the situation would allow for it, the Tigers would be very aggressive and would do it a lot, as you saw against Ohio State last season when the Buckeyes in the Cotton Bowl couldn't really challenge Missouri with especially the vertical passing game. Well, you saw Blake Baker was very eager to let Dalen Carnell and others just run wild in the Ohio State backfield with basically reckless abandon. So what I'm saying is there's no reason that Corey Batoon cannot recreate that particular defense. In fact, the basic structure, again, that single high defense with man-to-man coverage on the outside, we saw that a lot under a previous defensive coordinator as well in Ryan Walters, Drinkwitz's first year, who was a holdover from Barry Odom's staff, now the head coach at Purdue University. So the thing is, I think Batoon can keep the basic structure of what Missouri has done well the past 2 seasons on defense, and maybe just have a couple of wrinkles here and there, hopefully especially on, money downs like 3rd down, to get the defense off of the field, get the offense back onto the field just as importantly. So again, not meant to be an insult to Blake Baker at all, but I do think there is a case to be made that Corey Batoon can simply take the foundation of what Missouri's already built defensively, tweak it just a little bit, and make it better. For example, a lot of Missouri fans, I know this past season, occasionally you'd see Johnny Walker in a drop back into coverage, the Missouri edge rusher, drop back into coverage in a zone blitz, and often that didn't end well for the Tigers. I'll certainly admit that. Well, one thing about the Joker role, this is a slight tweak that Corey Batoon has made from Blake Baker's defense this offseason here. And sometimes this Joker player, one of this edge guy, is going to be standing up in a 3-point stance. And in part, well, sometimes his responsibilities are not just going to be getting up the field, but occasionally actually covering the pass as well. But specifically, though, it seems like this player's, more often than not, if he's going to have pass coverage responsibilities, it's simply going to be covering the flats. More often than not, that'll be the running back on a dump off, that type of thing, the release valve for the quarterback if there's a blitz or something like that. Maybe a couple linebackers or Dalen Carnell, somebody comes in a blitz. That means Walker's responsibility is that running back out in the flat. To me, that's not a big deal. That's a lot different than asking Walker to backpedal, 10 to 15 yards and cover a running back or a tight end on a wheel route down the field, something like that. If that's something that Missouri is going to be asking Walker to do once again on occasion, I would disagree with that I'm with all the fans who don't like that zone blitz coverage there for Walker specifically. But in terms of just covering the running back in the flat, I think that's a little bit different. I think that is something that, at the very least, can cause confusion and possible havoc plays and turnovers at the very least. Because, again, you're asking Walker to basically make an open field tackle, at the very least, turn the running back inside, set the edge in the passing game on that flat dump off, that type of thing. You're not asking him to cover, an excellent tight end downfield. That is a recipe for disaster. But in terms of the flat part of the Joker role, I'd like to see how that works out. That doesn't particularly worry me as much as it does maybe some Missouri fans at first glance. And while this show is going to be defensively focused, there has been an important member of the Missouri offense who's been absent from practice for at least a couple days here. So what do we make of that? Let's talk about it here in just a second. First, though, let's talk about Gametime, because when you need last-minute tickets to Major League Baseball this summer, there truly is no better place to go than Gametime, an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. Of course, tonight, the Cardinals and the Royals finish out their season series. Cardinals took it down last night with a big 8th inning in Kansas City. Promises to be another huge crowd once again. $51, though, the cheapest ticket to get in right now. That is an all-in price, by the way, with Gametime. But here's the good news. I can knock some of that cost off for you. All you have to do is take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen of the day. And if you love this format, you got to check out Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin. We're talking transfer portal, NIL, the playoff race, and more. Again, that's Locked On College Football, available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And unfortunately, Brett Norfleet, the Missouri tight end, who I think is, well, it could be a big part of this Missouri offense this fall, much more so than last season. Well, he's been absent from practice the past, I'd say, at least couple days, maybe 3 or 4, if I'm reading correctly. But I will say this, by the way, the SEC has been talking about starting an injury designation for this season. By the way, we're 3 weeks away. The SEC all about still throwing new rules their way, including tiebreakers for the conference championship game, injury reporting, and all that good stuff. But regardless, if the SEC does finalize its injury reporting rules here coming up for 2024, not going to have a huge impact on Missouri, I don't believe. Eli Drinkwitz has, compared to at least the rest of the country, he's been fairly open about injuries leading up to games. He doesn't usually make us guess and look for pregame warm-ups. But so long story short there, in other words, I think we'll probably find out here in the next day or two how Brett Norfleet's doing. The indications are right now not a serious injury, but if this is something that could maybe cost Brett Norfleet, maybe he's in doubt for week 1, that type of thing, I generally think that Eli Drinkwitz will probably share that information with us. So just stay tuned there on Brett Norfleet. Something to watch, but nothing I'm terribly concerned about at this point. Again, just the eyebrows raised just a little bit. I'm not too concerned at this point. Now, speaking of something you could either be concerned about or you could be optimistic about, depending on which way you look at it, because according to Power Mizzou, Nicholas DeLoach, not totally sure how to pronounce that young man's last name because he's a redshirt freshman, didn't play at all last season for the Tigers, but at the cornerback position, the young man got some number 1 reps with the first team over Clemson transfer Toriano Pride. Now, again, if you're a pessimist, you might be thinking, oh no, does this mean that Pride is not necessarily up to snuff? Well, you know what? I'm choosing to take this as a positive, as I often do, especially at this time of year. I'm just going to say that, again, a redshirt freshman here climbing up the depth chart to the point where he's getting some looks with the number 1 defense there to me, that's a good thing. Missouri has obviously 2 NFL corners to replace. As I mentioned in the first segment here, the more depth, the better, I would say, at that spot. And by the way, he also mentioned, he being Nicholas DeLoach, mentioned that, hey, when I'm at nickel, he's playing against Daniel Blood a lot, who's giving him a lot of challenge. And when I saw, when I'm at nickel, that made me immediately think, boy, it does at the very least seem like he's probably the number 3 cornerback right now. Because if you remember last season, it seems like he's the dime guy, I would say. He says, when I'm in the nickel. Really what he's saying is when I'm playing slot corner there, I would say. Because generally when Missouri's in the nickel, well, Dalen Carnell, their strong safety, their star safety, whatever you want to call him, he's the one who's generally going to be in the slot guarding that type of receiver. But on 3rd and 10 and long, that type of example last season, you may remember Ennis Rakestraw would move occasionally from the outside to the inside, and Drayden Norwood would come in and replace a safety or something like a linebacker, something like that, to have another pass defender in the game, and he would play on the outside. So I'm just thinking, hey, maybe they're just saying, hey, what is that look like? If we are going to play dime this season on third and long, that type of deal, who is the better nickel dime guy, whatever you want to call it, the guy to play inside? Do we just keep Pride on the outside in those situations, put DeLoach on the inside, or maybe Drayden Norwood or Pride would actually be better suited going inside? Because occasionally, take Squirrel White, for instance, on Tennessee, sometimes the best receiver, or of course Luther Burden from Missouri as well, sometimes the best receiver these days on a squad often lines up in the slot. So having one of your best corners in that spot, especially in an obvious passing situation, makes a lot of sense. So to me, at this point, I'm not going to overreact to having anything to do with Toriano Pride's play or lack thereof at this point in practice. I don't want to overanalyze that. To me, it seems more like a positive that a redshirt freshman corner in Nicholas DeLoach is starting to bubble up the depth chart. How can that really be a bad thing? Now, if you're bullish on Missouri for 2024, and I certainly am, one of the biggest things you're going to trumpet for the Tigers is the amount of returning production that the team has, especially on the offensive side of the football. But of course, there are even some new pieces on offense, including at the all-important blind spot on the offensive line. And I think, again, despite all of the returning production for Missouri, there could be some hiccups in September that, frankly, I don't think most fans should overreact to. I think that's one thing that I learned last season. Once again, September football, it's almost like preseason football in the NFL, especially when you have a schedule that Missouri does to start off September here. So I want to talk about what I think is going to challenge the Missouri running game and the offense in general here early in the season, and why actually there's another assistant coach that I would have been way more worried about if we'd have lost him in the offseason than Blake Baker. So let's talk about that after these quick messages. So when you see Markus Bryant, Missouri's left tackle, who's in a battle with Javen Richardson, by the way, Markus Bryant says he wants to be the best left tackle in the country. Well, you got to win the job first. Now, don't get me wrong, I think Bryant likely will win that job, but again, Javen Richardson, the junior college transfer, is not going quietly into that good night. Honestly, I'm glad there's some good competition on what is obviously a really important spot on this Missouri football team and on any football roster, of course. But Markus Bryant clearly has the size to play SEC offensive line. There's no question about that. He is a mountain of a man. So a kind of natural, good question I thought was asked of him a couple days ago was, on Missouri's outside zone running scheme, he was asked if that presents some different challenges for the big man athletically. And he said, yeah, definitely. There's definitely more plays where I have to be more athletic. It was kind of basic stuff. Now, kind of like a pin pull type deal here, it's a good adjustment. So to me, I think there is a chance when you look at that, just sort of like last season, Missouri, in my opinion, got much better with that outside zone running scheme as the year went along. Maybe some of that was Cody Schrader. I think most part it was the line and Brandon Jones, the offensive line coach, getting his schemes and principles installed, and just really more just probably basic coaching technique. Because again, Missouri certainly did not reinvent the wheel with its running game last season. The Tigers ran a ton of outside zone in 2022 as well. They just simply did it a lot more effectively in 2023. Now, again, I just think it's going to be so incredibly helpful to have a full off season with Brandon Jones. By the way, people may forget that Jones was not even hired until after spring football in 2023. So actually having an entire off season, having an entire spring period here to get these new linemen acclimated. And by the way, the guys who are returning, now they have all the principles and a better understanding of what Jones expects and wants. I just think that there's a chance that this Missouri offensive line, again, it'll probably take a little bit. Maybe there'll probably be some hiccups in September as we've seen before. But I think once we get rolling into the meat of this SEC schedule, I expect this to be a really good Missouri offensive line once again. If Jones is as good of a coach as I think he is, and I think this year is going to tell us a lot. And by the way, this isn't just my opinion. He's done an incredible job from basically all accounts here. And if there was one guy on the Missouri coaching staff right now, other than Eli Drinkwitz, of course, if there was one guy that I really don't want to lose, it's got to be Brandon Jones, even more so than Kirby Moore, for example. I just think offensive line coaches are just few and far between, really, really hard to find. And when you find one, you better hold on to them with both hands, that's for sure, because the big-time programs, Alabama, LSU, et cetera, they're always going to be looking to steal those particular guys with their huge war chest of money. Hopefully Missouri is going to be able to open up the checkbook and pay Brandon Jones here, because I think with another good season from that Missouri running game, especially Missouri proves they can do it with another, without Javon Foster, the NFL draft pick at left tackle. They get another running back in there. By the way, Cody Schrader a lot of good stuff coming about him coming out of 49ers camp right now. If Jones and this Missouri running game can run it back and have another really effective season on the ground, yeah, pay that man. Pay him his money. And congratulations to an all-time great Tiger. Markus Golden just announced that he is retiring from the NFL, just shy of his 10th season in the NFL. He had just signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers, though he had not practiced yet with the team, and decided to hang it up. I got to imagine that Markus probably just wasn't feeling it physically and decided to hang up the cleats after giving it one more shot. And good for him, honestly. An incredible 9-year career in the NFL. Actually made $6.5 million last season on a 1-year deal with the Arizona Cardinals. That's about half of his total career earnings based on just hit my plate there. A quick perusing of his Spot Track numbers there, his career earnings. So makes a lot of sense that Golden would try to give it one more shot, but you have to imagine just didn't maybe quite have it physically. But again, by all accounts, Golden just one of the good guys in Mizzou football history. In fact, one of his most recent teammates and a surefire NFL Hall of Famer, J.J. Watt, said, quote, "One of my favorite teammates of all time. Positivity and abundance, worked like an animal every single day, would do anything for his brothers. Love you, Junk. Congratulations on a hell of a career, brother," at Markus Golden. So, by the way, love you, Junk. That's short for the Junkyard Dog, which was Golden's nickname for much of his career. So again, Markus Golden, one of my favorite Tigers of all time, I would say. Certainly a lot of people agree with me there. A great guy, a great career. Congratulations to you. Be curious to see what Markus ends up doing with the next step in his career and life. And finally, speaking of great true sons or daughters, Karissa Schweizer, once again, does Missouri and America proud, finishing 9th in the 10K after finishing 10th in the 5K. Again, couldn't be more impressed with her. Obviously, short of a medal, but my goodness, imagine being 9th best in the world at something. As you all know, I like to play a lot of golf these days. Excuse me, if I suddenly woke up in a couple years and I were the 9th best golfer in the entire world, I think I'd take that. I think I'd feel pretty good about that. So congratulations to Karissa Schweizer. Is this it for her? Will she come back for another Olympics? I guess time will tell. But again, congratulations to Markus Golden, Karissa Schweizer. Thanks for making us proud here as Missouri fans, and thanks for joining me here on the podcast. As always, thanks for making this show your first listen every day. And again, if you're into this format, you're going to love Locked On College Football as well. Check it out on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So until next time, I am John Miller, and thanks for listening to Locked On Mizzou.